Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are discussing now all of the poems of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. We turn now to Whitman's Song of Myself, passage number 48. Now we have said that these last cantos, sections, poems, are somehow a crescendo of the integralist pedagogy, as we've used the term. Now it is possible that passage 48 is the most radical of all of the sections of Song of Myself for readers of 1855. Why? Because we have here the iconoclastic canto of all iconoclastic cantos. You remember we use that term, iconoclasm? Let's put it in our notes. Iconoclasm, of or related to attacking sacred ideas. And you can't get any more sacred of an idea in 1855 than views of religion and God. And this is where we're going to go with this passage. In this regards, put it in your notes. This will put pretty much Whitman in the same category as Chaucer and, of course, Dante. I mean, think about it. Dante in the Divine Comedy, as a Catholic writer, a Catholic believer, puts popes in hell. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You can't put popes in hell. Dante did. Of course, we've given full lectures on Dante, as well as, I mean, think about Shakespeare as an iconoclastic thinker, or Milton. We've given lectures on all these cats. Remember that we said that the line that we're always coming back to is from passage 4, both in and out of the game and wondering at it, watching and wondering at it. I witness and wait is what he says, and we're gonna see some of that happening here. Now, my hope is that you've been with us through our discussions at learnstrong.net, down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt, the 24 poems of inscriptions, the starting from Palmanac, 19 sections, and of course, Song of Myself, the intro comments all the way up through passage 47 that we just finished about. What did he say? Great readers are what? They're always challenging. We're going to play the same game. But I just want to start with Palmanac for a second. Do you remember this set of lines starting from Palmanac 7? I'm the credulous man of qualities, ages, races. I advance from the people in their own spirit. Here is what sings unrestricted faith. Omnis, omnis, let others ignore what they may. I make the poem of evil also. I commemorate that part also. I am myself just as much evil as good, and my nation is. And I say, there is in fact no evil, or if there is, I say it's just as important to you, to the land, or to me, or to anything else. I too, following many and followed by many, inaugurate a religion. I descend into the arena. It may be I am destined to utter the loudest cries there, the winner's pealing shouts. Who knows? They may rise from me yet and soar above everything. Now that prophecy comes to fruition in passage 48. Whitman's radical theology. God, the Word, gets used 11 times in this poem. I would write that down. I have said that the soul is not more than the body. And I have said that the body is not more than the soul. And nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. And whoever walks a furlong without sympathy walks to his own funeral dressed in his shroud. And I or you, pocketless of a dime, may purchase the pick of the earth. And to glance with an eye, or show a bean in its pod, confounds the learning of old times. And there is no trade or employment, but the young man following it may become a hero. And there's no object so soft, but it makes a hub for the wheeled universe. And I say to any man or woman, let your soul stand cool and composed before 1,000,000 universes. And I say to mankind, be not curious about God. For I, who am curious about each, am not curious about God. No array of terms can say how much I am at peace about God and about death. I hear and behold God in every object, yet understand God not in the least, nor do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. Why should I wish to see God any better than this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24, and each moment then. In the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and every one is signed by God's name, and I leave them where they are, for I know that wheresoever I go, others will punctually come forever and ever. Now, he begins this set of lines by saying, hey, I've already been across this territory once before. And of course, the echoes, as we commented on them, begin in passage 5. Hey, do you remember these lines from passage 5? I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. In other words, The soul and the body are of equal value. So this is where he starts. I've said the soul is not more than the body, and I've said that the body is not more than the soul. It's a pretty radical idea because, of course, in most theologies, the soul is above the body because the soul transcends the body in death. We'll get to death, by the way, in passage 49. And then the third line, the most radical. By the way, did you notice all these ands? This is what we call Anaphoria. If we've got 11 God repeatings here, we've got 10 times the word and gets used at the beginning of the line. We call this, for your notes, to be Anaphoria. Anaphoria, the repetition of the same word. And nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. Now, this poetry of identity is powerful stuff. And, of course, it begs the question, which self are we talking about? And reminding ourselves, the name of this poem is Song of Myself, right? And whoever walks a furlong without sympathy, this is the issue of compassion, walks to his own funeral dressed in his shroud. This will be one of the challenges of Whitman and his view of religion. Why is it that in religion we speak so much about love, and yet so regularly we often don't practice love, or compassion, or his word, sympathy? In other words, if you don't live a life of sympathy, he says, you might as well be dead already, going to your funeral dressed in your shroud. And look at the next line. I or you, pocketless of a dime, may purchase the pick of the earth. It isn't about money, he's going to argue in his theology. It isn't about money. And to glance with an eye. By the way, remember, he loves this word glance in Leaves of Grass. Or show a bean in its pod confounds the learning of all times. In other words, he says it. There's so many echoes. I mean, think about how many times you've heard this. It's the simplest things to glance with the eye. To just look with your eye confounds the learning of all times. Look at a bean in its pod. That is to say, nature teaches us something compelling about how majestic and amazing this world is. And there is no trade or employment, back to money, but the young man following it may become a hero. Hey, do you remember from starting from Paumanok 6, I will report all heroism from an American point of view. He comes back to it now. We have the echoes. And there's no object, this is a beautiful line, so soft, but that it makes a hub for the wheeled universe. Using some Buddhist and Hindu theology here, he pictures that it's the simplest things that make the world go round. You'll remember that Wordsworth in his 10 Turn Abbey lines we've talked about elsewhere at learnstrong.net. What is it that he says makes a great life? Little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. It's the little things that make our life amazing and important, not the big things. And finally he finishes, I say, to any man or woman, let your soul stand cool and composed. By the way, in the 55 it was supercilious, and then he changed it to composed. Before a million universes. In other words, don't be afraid of nothing. This is going to be his point. Don't be afraid of nothing. You should be able to stand in front of a million universes, cool and composed. Wow. And then he continues, and it even gets more radical. And I say to mankind, be not curious about God. Now, in his preface to the 55 edition, he had said, hate tyrants, argue not concerning God. When he says curious here, you should put this in your notes, he doesn't mean wonder, he means more fight. As in, don't be fighting or debating all the time about God. For I who am curious, and we know that Whitman is very curious, about each am not curious about God. In other words, I'm not interested in fighting about God. This is going to be his point. Whitman will recognize that in the history of the world of ideas, often wars are fought over something like, how do you define God? And so he says, I don't really want to play that game in my theological perspective. And then, in parentheses that are actually not there in the 55 edition, he says it this way, no array of terms can say how much I am at peace about God and about death. That is to say, translinguistic. There are no words, he says, that can really describe my own thinking and feeling about God and about death. By the way, do notice that they go together. We'll pick up with death. As we said, you got to leave the park. You can't swing at the park forever. That van is definitely waiting. We'll pick that one up in 49. But now he says what he has to say, and this is Whitman's inauguration of a new religion, some will argue. And he says, I hear and behold God in every object, yet understand God not in the least. Now, some will argue that this is the Spinoza pantheism, that God is in everything. But notice he says, I hear and I behold, I see God in every object. Now this will sound similar to some of the things that we stumbled across in Thoreau's Walden. We gave full lectures on each of the books of Walden. Go back and look at that. Nor, he says, do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. Now, Whitman is actually, of course, channeling a biblical verse here in Psalm 139:14, I am wonderfully made, right? That is to say, he keeps coming back to the self. Did you see the word? Myself. And the name of this poem is Song of Myself. And then he asks a really interesting rhetorical question. Now, of course, we've seen these rhetorical questions all the way through thus far, our reading of Leaves of Grass. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? Now, why would he even have a line like this? Well, of course, because a lot of religious people say they're most excited to die and see God. For Whitman, he's going to argue you don't have to die to see God. Why would I wish to see God better than this day? I see. Notice all this use of the word see. Perspicacity, insight. I see something of God each hour of the 24 and each moment then. Put it in your notes. Whitman's theology is you will see God if you will look for God. Where do you see God? In the faces of men and women, I see God. And in my own face in the glass. In other words, anytime I look at human beings, he says, I can't help but see God. Whitman's radical theology. And then, of course, to finish, I find letters from God dropped in the street. By the way, this is pretty much the same poem that he wrote in 55 in the deathbed edition. However, the spelling of dropped was the traditional spelling as opposed to the D-R-O-P-T, and then the alighted signed as well. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and everyone is signed by God's name. In other words, I see evidence of God everywhere I look, and I leave them where they are. Of course, it's fun. We can point this out, right? The book's called Leaves of Grass, and here he is. I leave them where they are. For I know, now we're back to what we know, right? I know that wheresoever I go, others will punctually come forever and ever. Interestingly, he spelled the word in the 55 edition as the one word, forever, and then he separated it for the deathbed edition. I'll let you figure out, what he was thinking about doing that. In other words, he makes the argument, and this is Whitman's radical iconoclastic theology. He makes the argument that one should be able to find God everywhere one looks, all the time, because it's such an amazing world. Remember, I stand for the sunny point of view, he had written in his notes, and here he will in fact give a very, very optimistic view. All right, let's finish up really quickly at 2a. How about this one? Your whole life, message theme. Your whole life should be a religious, respectful, awe-filled existence. Looking at another person's face should convince you there's something majestic and magical, mysterious about this thing we call living in this world. At 2b, we mentioned the repetitions. 10 times the word and is used. 11 times the word God is used, obviously, Anaphoria. At 3a, well, obviously our Chaucer and our Dante come to mind as iconoclasts. We can think about our St. Augustine as well as our Luther. Any of those who are kind of radical religious thinkers. Whitman is definitely channeling all of those in this passage, which for many readers of 55, this was the most radical passage of Song of Myself, because it said so much about a natural theology that really disturbed a lot of people who consider themselves profoundly religious. Finally, at 3b, question for you to own this passage. What is your view of religion? What is your view of God? And then, what is your view of death? I mean, as we've said, they were teaching it to you from the moment that you were at the park swinging and didn't want to go to the van. The van is waiting. You do not get to swing at that park forever. You ain't met no 200-year-old people. How do you wrap your brain around that fact? And how does that work for you? That you haven't met any 200-year-old people. And death is definitely coming. It is one of the few certainties, absolutes of our existence. Passage 49, we'll pick up with that one in our final now lines as we're moving towards the end of Song of Myself. Thank you.